All right. Automatic slip reductions during penalty brake applications, temporary suppression of overspeed control applications with the A2 reduction selector valve. The A2 reduction selector valve with the figure 11 is a device that, when used with a P2A brake application valve with the first suppression reserve, is associated with the cutout cock and is adjusted function with the basic 26L brake equipment function to produce a split reduction during the penalty brake application. It also provides a temporary suppression over the overspeed penalty brake applications. The cutout cock is used in conjunction with the first suppression reservoir and is a plug type and have an S-climb plate designated into the two-handle position, namely for freight open and passenger close. The cutout cock handle of the freight position and the freight suppressor reserve is cut out to provide with a split reduction, and the cutout cock handle of the passenger position, the reserve cutout in the straight railway reductions result. The first suppression reserve contains the volume of the air of the air pressure, brake pipe pressure, whenever the equipment is conditioned with the freight service, depending of which over predetermined period of the time provides the first period of part of the split reduction during the penalty brake application. The manner in which the A2 reduction selector valve is associated devices are piped in the 26L brake equipment is shown in plate 12. The A2 reduction selector valve consists of the suppression valve portion of the split reduction valve mounted on the common pipe bracket to which all the pipe connections are made and identified as follows: brake pipe, switch pipe, application pipe, equalizing reservoir charging the pipe, charging pipe, brake pipe, exhaust pipe, part brake valve, the port X, first suppression reserve, reduction limiting reserve, 25 the power knockout, 26 the suppression pipe, 41 the suppression gauge pipe, 42 stop reserve. The suppressing valve of the portion contains the charging valve, which permits the charging of the first suppression valve of the first suppression reserve volume, so long as associated with the cutout cock position of freighted in service automatic brake valve handle in the release position. The charge valve automatic also functions to exhaust the air and from the first suppression of the reserve during the brake valve initiated with the brake application to ensure if a penalty brake application initiated at the top of the manual of the brake application, the split reduction will be nullified. The suppression of the valve portion also contains the suppression valve, which is permitted with the temporary suppression of an overspeed brake application. All right, this shows the suppression valve portion and the split reduction valve portion, the differential section with the starting on the split reduction valve portion. You see the differential check of the reduction limiting valve, the split reduction spool valve, and the split diaphragm valve. On the suppression valve of the portion, you see the charging valve, double check valve, and the suppression valve. This is an A2 reduction selector valve. The split reduction of the valve portion is the same as the portion employed by the A1 reduction selector valve as described in the preceding section. In this function during the penalty brake application to terminate charging to the first suppression reserve, then to employ the volume of the air to divide it with the equalizing reserve reduction to two distinct stages, the first of which results from the approximately 78 psi reduction from the psi commencing with the second or last stage of the reduction will continue. The brake valve handle is moved to the suppression position. Operating, release, and charging. With the 26A brake valve handle in the release position, the handle of the cutout cock of the pipeline of the first suppression reserve set in the freight position, main reserve air flows from the port number 3 into the brake valve to the port number 3 and the A2 reduction selector valve in is a chamber beneath the charging valve spool valve. To position this valve in the uppermost position is shown in figure 1-1. The brake pipe airflow port number 1 is the reduction selector valve pipe. The brake void in which it flows with the charging valve spool port number 22 in the reduction spool valve. Spring tension holds the split reduction spool in the valve as the lowermost position, connecting the numbers 20 and 22 and 23, thereby charging the first suppression reserve to the brake pipe pressure. Port number 15 being connected to the equalizing reserve charging pipe at the 26 brake valve. The P2 brake application valve is charged with the equalizing reserve pressure. Part number 26 is then being connected to port number 26 at the 26A brake valve at the P2A brake application valve exhausted atmosphere into the brake valve suppression valve. Portion 24 and 25 are connected to ports number 24 and 25 respectively at the P2A brake application valve and are at atmospheric pressure with no penalty brake application in effect. The suppression valve in the valve with the suppression valve is portioned in its uppermost position in the spring tension connection to the number ports of the number 10 and 42. Thus, by application of the number port number pipe number 10 from the P2A brake valve is connected through the suppression valve with the spool to the overspeed magnet, the valve V with the port number 24, and the H5A relay air valve, which is normally open so long that the open so long as the brake valve has not been cut out of the trailing unit. Portion number 17, which leads to one side of the double check valve and the suppression valve with the portion connected to the port number X and the brake valve exhaust port. That relay portion of the 26 brake valve is vented to the atmosphere of the brake valve handle in the release position. The charging of the opposite side of the double check valve is exhausted through the choke located in the cover of the spring chamber of the charging valve. Penalty brake applications. Actuation of the P2A brake application valve with the function of the overspeed control and safety control venting devices will cause the A2 reduction selector valve to split the equalizing reserve reduction from the air from the port number 25 port to the P2A brake application valve with the flow from the port number 25 into the A2 reduction selector valve, the underside of the split reduction spool valve, thus moving the spool level against the spring tension in the uppermost position. Also, the air will flow from port number 25 to the outer face of the suppression valve of the diaphragm to prevent the suppression of the application after the initiated by the P2A brake application unit valve. Its position spool valve, the charging of the first suppression reserve is terminated with the first air reserve volume is connected with the V of the port number 31 in the chamber and beneath the split reduction diaphragm. The split diaphragm valve spool valve is moved upwardly, closing the connection between the ports of number 24 and 24B. Equalizing reserve equalizing is confined with the number 24 pipe valve with the reduction limiting reserve between the P2A brake application valve with the split reduction diaphragm valve with the A2 reduction selector valve to produce the first step in the split reduction. This number 24 pipe between the two valvular devices must be specific length depending upon its pipe size, so it's approximately volume that will produce initial equalizing reserve reduction of approximately 78 psi. The split reduction diaphragm valve is held in the uppermost position until the pressure of the first suppression reserve volume has been reduced to a significantly low valve to vent the atmosphere and through the calibrated choke with the diaphragm cover to cause the spring tension to move the valve lowermost position, reestablishing the connection between ports 24 and 24B, which an occurrence of the second and final step of the split reduction accomplished with the continuing exhaust with the equalizing reserve air to the atmospheric surface rates of the V of the ports number 24 and 24B, the past end of the reduction limiting the valve to produce a valve's full service brake application. A minimum reduction. First part of the split reduction of the following. The penalty brake application cannot be avoided. However, the full service brake application may be avoided by moving the automatic brake valve handle to the suppression position before the expiration of the approximately 20 seconds after the initiating of the penalty brake application. This is 20 seconds of the approximate delay time before the start and the second part of the split reduction movement of the brake valve handle. The suppression position permits the air, the main reserve pressure, to flow from port number 26 of the brake valve through the port number 26 to the A2 reduction selector valve, causing and reducing and limiting to the valve. It's moved against the spring tension to the uppermost position to close off the exhaust of the equalizing reserve air from the port number 24B. Also, the brake valve handle suppression position of the air exhausted from port number 3, allowing the charging valve to move downwardly in the spring tension is closing the brake pipe port number 1 and charging the valve exhausting port number 22. If the P2A brake valve is reset with the delay time, the split reduction spool valve will reestablish the port number 23 into port number 22 connection. As a result, the venting air from the port number 25 underside of the spool valve into the spool valve of the P2A brake application valve. The air of the first suppression reserve is then exhausted past the upper end of the charging valve at the V of the port number 22. Equalizing reserve in the air port number 24 is also exhausted at the spool valve of the braking application valve. Port number 5 of the equalizing reserve are bottled up in the release of the control valve in the brake application immediately following the resetting of the P2A brake application valve. The movement with the brake valve handle into the release position will actuate the release control valve of the reestablished port number 15 to port number 5 connection within the brake application valve to permit the running of the release of the brakes. The P2A brake application valve does not reset the delay time period. The entire supply of the air of the first suppression reservoir will have been exhausted at the time of the choke of the covering beneath the split reduction diaphragm valve. This valve will then be moved downward with spring tension to reestablish the port number 24 to the port number 24B connection. Since the brake valve has been placed in suppression position, equalizing reserve air cannot vent to the atmosphere past the upper end of the reduction, limiting the valve from the port number 24B. However, equalizing reserve air in the port number 24B can flow from the light spring-loaded differential check valve into port number 15, since the air pressure in that port has been reduced to approximately 24 psi. The brake valve handling in the suppression position equalizer reserve air can be there flow into the equalizing reserve charging line, with the result of the full service brake application will be ensured during a penalty brake application. If a penalty brake application is initiated on the top of the brake valve with the service of the brake application, the split reduction feature is lost due to the venting of the port number 3. The first suppression reserve will have been ventilated to the atmosphere via the charging valve and the choke in the cover. The equalizing reserve air in the port number 27, 24, and 24B will reduce the service rate past the reduction limiting valve. Temporary suppression of the overspeed control application. With the equipment fully charged for the condition of the freight service, the first suppression reserve cut in, making a light brake application with the brake valve before the expiration of the warning period prior to the application of the P2A brake application valve permits the temporary suppression of the overspeed penalty brake application, moving the brake valve out of the release position vents from passage number 3 of the A2 reduction selector valve, causing the charge of the valve to first terminate, charging the first suppression reserve, then connecting the reserve volume through the passage number 23 and 22 to choke this cover the chamber above the double check valve and the suppression valve portion. Pressure above the double check valve the head holds the valve down, thus permitting the air from the first suppression reserve to flow not only into port number 41, which is connected to the suppression gauge, but also to the chamber above the suppression valve diaphragm. At such a time, the sufficient pressure is developed in port number 41 and on the uppermost face of the suppression valve diaphragm. The suppression valve will be moved downwardly against the spring tension to cut off port number 10 from port number 20 to 42. It must be remembered, however, that the air chamber above the suppression of the valve diaphragm is being ventilated through the choke and the cover. The blowdown time of the air of the first suppression reserve through the choke is approximately 20 seconds so that the brake valve handle is placed in the service zone of the application. The brake pipe of the air and the exhausted relay portion of the brake valve's port X flows through the connection pipe to the port number 17 at the A2 reduction selector valve. Since the air pressure in port number 17 is now greater than the port number 22, the double check valve, with which is moved up in position in the air port number 17, can then flow in the chamber and suppression valve of the diaphragm, holding the diaphragm assembly into the lowermost position to close off the port number 42 to port number 10 connection. As air in port number 17 is exhausted in the atmosphere through the calibrated choke and the relay portion of the automatic brake valve. Therefore, successful light brake applications should be made in order to permit the air from suppression reserve to position the suppression valve down in the air port of the number 17 will add the supply to the position of the double check valve upwardly momentarily, maintaining the suppression valve in its down position and the entire function provided with the temporary suppression. With the brake valve handled in the service zone of the application, the brake force will be applied to the locomotive. The braking force is not sufficient to slow the locomotive the speed allowable to the speed in order to de-energize the overspeed magnet valve. Successive light brake applications are required. The locomotive speed is not reduced, then allowed into the airport number 17. The chamber above the suppression valve of the diaphragm would be exhausted to the atmosphere of the brake valve. The suppression valve assembly will then be moved upwardly, and the spring tension in the portion of number 42 and the port number 10 connection will be reestablished. Air in the number 10 pipe can then be exhausted to the temperature atmosphere via the outer overspeed of the magnet valve. In passenger service, the first suppression reserve air is cut off by the position of the associated cutout cock and split reduction brake application temporarily. The suppression over the overspeed control penalty brake applications cannot be obtained. Automatic split reductions and during penalty brake application, temporary and permanent suppression of the train control brake applications with the C1 suppression valve.